Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to the Ultimate Doctor Who Marathon. This is the show where I go get every classic Doctor Who story plus a bunch of Big Finish audio dramas, one episode a day, 7 days a week. And today, on the 27th of February, 2020, we are starting a look at an anthology release. Yes, this is one of those Big Finish anthologies where there are, multiple stories all in one nice little bundle of a season. Though before we begin, I'd like to say that because in 2019, YouTube was caught data mining illegally the data of younger users. They enforced new policy to scapegoat creators to remain compliant with the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act, making me make sure you know that this video is not intended for children. Yes, Doctor Who is a show that can be watched by the entire family, but this channel and all the videos on it are looking at Doctor Who from an adult perspective and will potentially discuss adult themes. So that being said, viewer discretion is advised. That being said, let's start this anthology release, which is The Demons of Red Lodge and Other Stories, written by this is an anthology release that is written actually by 4 authors. Unlike Circular Time, which was just 2 authors, this is an author for each story, and with each story, they are basically, at the time they were they were all authors new to the main range of Big Finish. So we're starting today with the titular story, The Demons of Red Lodge, which was written by Jason Arnott, the entire and directed by Ken Bentley, who in what I think this might be one of the this is one of the first main range stories that Bentley actually directed. This is pretty early on in his career, because he's been directing for a long time, and he does an excellent job with the direction of this story. It's always fun to listen to the way he does things, and even if you're not necessarily getting a perfect story, you're getting at least one that sounds great. So, because The Demons of Red Lodge by Jason Arnott it's an okay start. As this is an anthology, each of these episodes is completely different, so you never quite know what you're going to get, production-wise. But Demons of Red Lodge sets the tone, doing a semi-horror story of the Doctor and Nyssa arriving at Red Lodge, where this woman and her twin sister live, and there are very creepy goings-on, and things happen, and the villagers are unsettling. It's a very evocative setting, and the writing here does a great job of doing something evocative and doing something interesting. Arnott is clearly, having fun writing for this TARDIS team and having a good time making sure that all the pieces fit together and the characters are, and the characters work well on audio. But what ends up not necessarily happening as well is that there isn't actually a lot of this story to be said. It's not a very deep story. It's the problem of a short story that doesn't really know what it wants to say. It's kind of doing a horror movie type theme, and it has some until the aliens show up. There really isn't much it does, because what's interesting is the aliens are essentially aliens that sort of absorb people, and they're trying to create an ultimate race. It kind of turns into a story that's kind of about eugenics, and that aspect of the story just kind of comes out of nowhere. That surprise, it's very much a surprise. Eugenics is what the theme of the story is, which is just a weird theme. You don't really get all that. You don't really see how much sense that makes, if that really makes a lot of sense, having eugenics be the theme about humanity. And the way the Doctor actually defeats the aliens is kind of cruel. And it's something that that Arnop acknowledges is kind of out of character for the Fifth Doctor, that he lets them absorb his biodata, and they essentially become they can no longer they basically they kill themselves because they end up having 1.01 like 101% of a human in, like more than 100, so like they have a little more of an extra heart, which throws everything off and then kills them, which is definitely an interesting way of defeating a villain, though I don't know if it's necessarily a good way of finishing off the story with this. It's one of those things where you have you have the story goes on, to just have this weird this weird thing where you don't get the ending here. It's a very, very weird sort of thing where you have just this plot with these characters, and just about everything dealing with the with the titular demons, which are interesting. I don't entirely agree with them. It's not absolutely one of the best stories that you have. It's definitely a good start to the set, but it's just not amazing. So overall, I'm going to give the Demons of Red Lodge a 7 out of 10. Alright, it's the 28th of February, 2020, and I just finished listening to the second story in the Demons of Red Lodge and Other Stories, the Entropy Composition, written by not Nick Briggs, but Rick Briggs, who, though his name is one letter off from Big Finish's founder, he is actually not related in any way to Nicholas Briggs, which is quite funny when you realize this story was the winning a story in a competition to write for Big Finish, for this release specifically, which is it's just one of those interesting little quirks where you have a surprise moment of a story being winning, and it's just one of those weird coincidences that sometimes can happen in the world like this, where you have a story written by someone like that, and you can really see why Rick Briggs' story won the competition, because it's a great example of doing a short story really quickly, but with a lot of depth, and with some experimentation to boot about the ideas that it's playing around with. The story basically deals with the Doctor and Nyssa arriving at basically a planet-sized archive of music, which is just already you have a fascinating setting, like a planet-sized. It's one of those things. It's an interesting idea. Is this. An entire planet just dedicated to music. And what's happening is that the music is being corrupted somehow and attacking people, which is it is one of those sort of ideas that you can only do on audio. Like, 'cause how could you represent music attacking people in a visual medium? Like, that's not really possible, or if it is possible, it's not really an easy story to produce. But doing it on audio means you can get around that sort of harder idea of, this being a story all about music and just how music, you know, sort of infects people. And what's interesting is that Rick Briggs is basically playing off some ideas with the progressive rock movement of the late 1960s, early 1970s, and playing around with like an ancient, just an ancient sort of, an ancient creator, an ancient sort of being from an earlier point in the universe. Like, there's this specific composition which basically in its sound holds, it's revealed over the course of the story to hold a, to hold basically an entropy siren called Arisi, who is this creature from outside the universe, not really being allowed to enter our dimension and our universe proper, but is one of those creatures who is trying is using it to basically use primordial sonics to return the universe to a state where she can exist. It actually asks an interesting question, because the Doctor has to defeat this menace that, why wouldn't it have a right to live? It's just like I mean, I get the idea is that its time is past and is no longer like it's no longer one of those things where you have the story going. It's definitely an interesting take on a villain, and the way the Doctor ends up defeating them is actually really clever. He and Nyssa actually find a way to sort of lock them while also not altering time. There's really is a lot of care taken care of, with the story trying to be one where you don't really get you don't really necessarily always get this tight pacing, and as a first story is really is really one of those interesting things. There's also just this there's also just this idea of this is one of those weird little stories where there just isn't the entire ending, and actually, but what really makes this story interesting and fun is actually Sarah Sutton as Nyssa. She pretended to be a groupie of Jeff Cooper, who is the progressive rock musician who composes this piece. And it's really a funny. It's really just a funny. Actually, puts on this Cockney accent. The implication is that it's something that that Tegan may have taught her in the past, and as Tegan taught her, she sort of picked up these speech and mannerisms from those experiences with Tegan, which is it's just a really fascinating way of doing a story, and it's really fun. Also, the sound design by Richard Frox and Lauren Yason is also really solid here. Because you have this sort of old-fashioned maid character in these sections that take place on Earth, who then gets completely disintegrated by music, and it's just there's this squelch and this really nice sound effects that are really evocative, and just the evocative nature of these specific sound effects make it feel, more original and more of a, really, really, just a real interesting way of doing this sort of story. Um, it's, it's got, a couple of issues. There definitely could have been more done to make the story longer and explore more of its ideas. Again, the short story format is a little bit limiting, but still, overall, this is a really, really solid, a really, really solid story. A lot more fun than the Demons of Red Lodge, and definitely a step up in quality for this anthology release. So overall, I'm going to give the Entropy Composition a 9 out of 10. Alright, it's still the 28th of February 2020, and I just finished listening to Doing Time, the third story in the Demons of Red Lodge and Other Stories. This story is written by William Gallagher, who I believe is a journalist. So he's and just obviously a Doctor Who fan, as he's writing a Fifth Doctor and Nyssa audio. Doing Time is a story with a great premise and some really, really good ideas, and a good use of the short story format, but I think it falls apart on one account, and that's the whole idea that it's telling a story that, at least the big reveal, it's telling a story that isn't very original, like the Doctor actually causing a problem while he's trying to fix it due to like foreknowledge is something that's kind of been explored before, but I don't necessarily know if it's been explored this directly. The premise here is that the Doctor has picked up in the TARDIS that on May 10th of a certain year on this planet, this prison called Folly is going to be destroyed in a massive explosion. And so he goes back to try to essentially not stop the explosion, but make sure the governor knows that the explosion is going to happen, and to make sure that all the people who would be affected by the explosion and killed in it are essentially allowed, are given, are evacuated, and that the, and that basically, like, no one actually loses their life in this explosion, because no one would have to lose their life in the explosion. It's very much built on the premise that, no one has to die. And essentially, what happens from this point on is that the Doctor basically is not listened to. He's thrown in prison, which is hilarious. Imagining the Fifth Doctor in prison under the moniker Dr. John Smith, who is some famous intergalactic criminal. Which, again, this is the Fifth Doctor we're talking about. One of the Doctors who isn't violent and, isn't your standard, oh, I'm going, could easily be being imprisoned. The one, the one who you'd think that, oh, prison is going to really, really, no, he actually survives and makes, a good use of his time. It's really one of those interesting ideas here, as you have a story that plays around with just the idea that that these that this whole prison scenario is one where it's just the general kind of insanity that that things that things aren't necessarily wouldn't necessarily be working out because of just the whole they're in prison. Um, it's definitely an interesting sort of take as we see the Doctor essentially any sort of plan he has fall apart. There's also this really big emphasis on the Doctor being bored in prison, um, because um, basically because it's like, oh well, he of course he's bored in prison. It's the whole, he's trying to fulfill himself with something to do, and in trying to do that he doesn't really ever find anything to do, and kind of wastes away as he's trying to figure out what's going on, and a way to like stop this explosion from killing everybody. um, Really, where Gallagher's experience as sort of a journalist comes in, seems to be, at least in my mind, in all the aspects of the story that that are basically, um, that are basically dealing with the whole idea of, the governor of the prison who was trying to become president, basically using this, going to be planning on getting as much information out of the Doctor as she can to use this, um, basically to use um, this tragedy as a way for her to have her own, her own ends, and to make her bid for president really, become accurate. I don't know if it's necessarily emulating an actual like specific politician from the time. It very well could be, um, but it's definitely something scummy that politicians have been known for, and it's something where you really do know that, yeah, this is sadly something that very easily could potentially happen with with everybody as it stands. It's sad but true, but it's just a true fact. But of course, the story ends with everything kind of happy, and there's actually a lot of really fun supporting characters. Like you have this nice security guard who Nyssa sort of deals with, who helps, and he helps Nyssa sort of find her own life and spend a year on this planet trying to figure out how to get into the prison to save the Doctor. You have this other prisoner who is just sort of like almost a lovable rogue archetype, played by John Dorney. Um, you know, it's a it's a story full of a lot of fun characters with a lot of really really fun things. It's not perfect. Again, it's stuff we've seen before, but overall, I'm going to give Doing Time an 8 out of 10. All right, it's the 29th of February 2020. Yes, leap year, so we have a leap day. And today is, of course, the final story in this anthology that we've been looking at for the past couple of days. Special Features, which was John Dorney's first Big Finish main range story that he was a writer of. He started out his Big Finish career as an actor, so you actually do get some of his stuff as the actor version of John Dorney. But this is his first time as a writer for the main range, and this is actually the highlight of the set for many reasons. The first of which is actually that this is a story all about. Well, this is an experimental story, and it's one that actually connects with the first story from the set, The Demons of Red Lodge. This is a story that is basically what it does is that this is a story all about presented as 30 minutes of a DVD commentary for this whole for this old 1976 film, Dr. Demonic's Tales of Terror, which is basically an anthology horror film, starring an old actor who's a good legitimate character actor of stage and screen, kind of similar to William Hartnell. Not really all that similar to Hartnell. But what the story is doing is that it's presenting this scenario as essentially as if just as a DVD commentary, like as 30 minutes at a recording. And you think, oh, well, what sort of story can you actually tell with that? Well, actually, it's kind of telling a sequel to The Demons of Red Lodge. The idea is that the first section of this film is basically based off of the Demons of Red Lodge. It goes back to the same place, and really where a lot of the enjoyment comes from is just one listening to this this sort of this very weird, almost like this very weird just group of people, three people, the actor, the director, Martin Ashcroft, which is interesting because that's actually a pseudonym that Ashcroft is a pseudonym that the Seventh Doctor will eventually use. And it's one of those. It's just this interesting sort of idea that you have these three characters and the Doctor watching this film, and and through the commentary you really just sort of you basically understand a lot of what happened in the old thing. Like the Doctor is posing as Dr. John Smith as a historical advisor in the film. He is playing, Nyssa is pretending to be Nyssa Traken, from TARDIS, basically an actor who only ever made the one film, and only ever really, did a lot of things. What's also quite funny is that the characters, Jack Merivale and then the director, Martin Ashcroft, actually have lives outside of this. They were referenced in The Crooked Man, which was also written by John Dorney, but written much after. So it's actually quite fun that there's just a lot of stuff here where you have just these villains, and you sort of just have the tension build as the Doctor really doesn't do much. Like you find out that just sort of in retrospect that this film was plagued with problems and there was talks of a curse because this original actress who was supposed to play the character Felicity had to be replaced by Nyssa. So many people, but what really starts to get you is that so many people connected to the film were just dying suddenly in their sleep as really young people. The idea here is that this is like an early style DVD commentary. So I think it's like specifically stated to be taking place in 2001 for because it's for the 25th anniversary, DVD release. Where you really get a lot of the enjoyment is that it's not really. You won't get an understanding of this. A lot of the jokes here, unless you are already kind of familiar with the commentaries on the Doctor Who DVD releases, because that's kind of what it's parodying. It's parodying specifically Fifth Doctor commentaries. Like you have this character Joanna Burke, who's basically playing the Janet Fielding role of pointing out things about costumes and interrupting and just stopping the conversation of the commentary dead, which is really, really funny. It's really funny, really self-aware. It is kind of a shame that Janet Fielding isn't involved in this story at all, because she could have just added another layer of meta to it, and it would have been a lot even funnier if you just added that there. because it's hilarious. And honestly, just the whole you hear them defeat this thing, and then the Doctor and Nyssa just leave because Nyssa's been the one recording the commentary, and then like, okay, cool, they're now doing, they're now doing this, they're now doing this whole idea with the characters, and playing around with it, and just playing around with a lot of the stuff. And really, there isn't shying away from horror, like the big reveal that Joanna Burke, who is actually the villain, and has actually been inhabited her mind and left her for dead, and the Doctor defeats her, basically by preparing a speech for the commentary. It's really quite fun, and it's something that could only really be done on audio because it's a DVD commentary, and maybe it slightly dates it a little bit, but it's fun for what it is, and it does a really, really good, it's just a really, really good example of experimenting with format and just playing around with what you can do. So overall, I'm going to give special features a 10 out of 10. That being said, we add up the scores and average them out to give the Demons of the Red Lodge and Other Stories a final score of 8.5 out of 10, making this not as good as Circular Time was. Circular Time did kind of set the bar really, really high for anthologies, but still pretty darn good and definitely worth your time. As always, thank you for watching this installment of the Ultimate Doctor Who Marathon. Please leave a like, comment, and subscribe if you haven't already, and join me next time when we take a look at the final of the Fifth Doctor and Nyssa anthology releases, and one starring Star Trek star and often fan cast for the Doctor, but in certain circles, Alexander Siddig in 1001 Nights.